So the first thing I've got to do is I got to thank my group because when we were talking about sustainability, my head jumped to, oh, we got to conserve land and water and bees and all this stuff because we produce food and without some of that stuff we can't produce it. So thanks for letting me talk and not cutting me off and say I was on the wrong track there. So I didn't put any slides together for a couple of reasons. One, I've been busy like everybody else, and then it has to go through a big process to go and get. So I thought you guys probably just want to hear about where we're at in our digital journey. So I'll talk about that. If you guys have questions, just yell at me because there's a big bright light in my eyes, so I probably maybe can't see you guys. So to start off with, I think General Mills, when you hear about General Mills, obviously we're a big company, and there's a digital transformation that's happening within the company, right? So when you hear our CEO talk about it, he is not probably talking about the digital transformation in the manufacturing and industrial space. He's talking about digital transformation for the company. And I think, and I'll get this wrong, I think he said we're going to spend 25 million this year on digital transformation. So he's betting on digital transformation. That's going to be probably not in engineering and manufacturing. It's going to be in marketing and other areas. But that will lead to other areas getting that transformation. So with that, I work in engineering, and so we're part of supply chain. And so for us, we think of supply chain as we plan, we source, we make, can we deliver, and then we have a customer segment. So I'm going to talk about, and I work in kind of the make space. But it's important to know that there's digital transformation happening in every one of these spaces. And probably the make space is the least prioritized in a good way because we're probably the best off right now. So through all the work we've done in manufacturing and controls and information systems, we're pretty far ahead versus our planning organizational group, right? So, and this is recorded, so it's kind of be bad, but so we have SAP that has, APO. It spits out our planning. The planners look at it. They toss that aside. They get their Excel spreadsheet out, and they kind of made their own things, right? So we know there's a lot of work to be done in that whole area. So we are working on it. So what I would say is we are in the midst of putting our supply chain digital transformation roadmap and strategy together for the make space. And I'll try to cover some of that right now. So when I think about the make space and digital transformation, I kind of think about Industry 4.0 as the group of technologies around that. And so we talk more about it in that sense, at least in the engineering organization. So we've talked about our strategy being a connected factory. And we'll have 4 kind of workflows in that connected factory to kind of look at things. Empowering our worker, right? So all the stuff around IoT, wearables, AR, VR, all the stuff that's going to empower our worker. Flexible manufacturing, so we'll talk about cobots and how to manufacturing differently and how we can do things differently to either open up a new market that we couldn't do before or those types of things. Data and analytics is a whole different section that we kind of talk about, which would include machine learning and all that stuff. And then the last one is really intelligent machines. We've talked about that. So if I step back and look at how we've been looking at how to do this, and as Greg went through a lot of his things, it's the same things we're kind of working with, right? So my role didn't exist 2 years ago. They kind of said, Joe, you've got 25 years in this controls and information system space. You've worked with the businesses. Help us start to put a plan together. So we're looking at kind of a steering committee at the executive level, right? So to be our vice president of North America operations, it'd be R&D, it would be engineering, it'd be our manufacturing excellence VP. So they would be the steering group that would help prioritize what we'd work on, right? So examples would be, I want a lights out factory. So what would it take to do that? I want never to ever have a recall again. How can you guys do that to digital transformation? So we're looking for that. Then the next section of this triangle would be a governance section. That's where I kind of fall in. and we'll have other people from other areas. This is that IT/OT convergence that would sit in that space. And then the bottom is really about all the people that are going to execute and do things. And that kind of leads to the next change of how we're looking about things is, and again, people have talked about this, experimentation. And General Mills before, at least in the controls group, we would pilot something, and if it worked, it went into production, right? So we had zero scale up. We didn't step back and say, what did we learn? It usually took a sizable amount of capital or something to do that pilot. So what we're trying to do now is do more of POCs, right? So we're just looking at how can I do something so small that I don't need to justify it? So I can go get resources or capital if I need capital, but it's so small that I can do that. And then I do that POC to kind of understand the business value. Now I can take that and say, did it make the business value what I wanted? Now I can do a pilot. From that pilot, now I can do commercialization. And then I would go into a continuous improvement kind of process. So we're doing a lot of that, and we're marrying that up to business problems, right? So I guess we're doing both, right? So we're trying to solve business problems with technology, but then we're also doing experiments just to understand technology so that you know enough to say, oh, I can answer that business problem with this technology, right? Because a lot of it's really new. Let me check my notes. So this is a thing I guess I wanted to ask this group. We spend a lot of time in our organization talking about like name brands of stuff. Like we have a homegrown MES and we know we have to switch to a off-the-shelf MES at some point. And so we spend a lot of time talking about, is it Aviva's MES? Is it Siemens? Is it GE? And what I've told my VP and stuff is we need to stop talking about that and just kind of talk about what's the problem that we need to solve. Because if we're talking about MES, we're talking about really not Industry 4.0, we're kind of talking about Industry 3.0. And I think the premise, so this is the question I have, I would say in order to do 4.0, you had to do 3.0. Because if you didn't do the basics, you can't build on it. Now, it could be that you can do it in a totally different way, right? So I'll use the analogy, I don't know if this makes sense or not, but I just put a security system. I built a house and I had to put a security system in because my wife said, I want a security system and I don't want you to build that security system because you'll be messing with it all the time. So we had to buy one. And then I'm like, okay, well, I have to put a phone line in now to monitor, right? So I go to the guy and he's like, why would you put a phone line in? He's like, so somebody can cut it? He's like, we're just going to put a cellular modem in there and be done. So my point is, we still have to monitor, but technologies could change to do it differently. And so I think we always have to be looking at, I have to do those basics, but maybe it's just done in a different way that I could do it a lot cheaper and has more benefits. So I think that's a challenge we're always going through, that I keep talking with the team about, not putting steam engines in when we're in an electric world. Let's see if I had any other comments really quick, and then I'd love to hear back from you guys. Here's the other thing I don't think comes up a lot, is when I don't know, we have a lot of vendors that will show us and try to sell us either machine learning or AI stuff. And the question that one of our engineers asked, which was really good, he asked the question of, is this going to make all my days look like my good days, or is this going to make my good days great? So meaning that I'm going to look at all this data of how my plants line, so I take a line, how that line run, it's going to look for patterns and stuff, but it's only going to be able to find the pattern of the best day and say, this is what you want to look like. It's not going to say, oh, here is how you get to the next level. So that's just a very interesting thing to ask a vendor, to say, well, is this going to make my good days great, or is this just going to make my days look all like my good days? So that was really, I think, a good way that people can understand that. The other thing that is complicating our transformation is acquisitions and divestitures, right? So we acquired an incredibly great company called Blue Buffalo. So anybody have pets? You guys should buy Blue Buffalo. It's so good. That's my pitch to keep my salary going. But we bought that, and they surprisingly didn't have all the same standards we did, right? And so when you're starting to build up all of this data and have context that data, now you have to go in and say, do I rip and replace this system? How do I build that same kind of context into those types of things? And then the other thing that scares me is like you start putting all this technology in, and then you have to kind of say, we're selling that business. How do I now disconnect that out in a very easy way that doesn't take a lot of time and energy, and that I don't have this IP left in a plant? So that was what I had as our journey. We're still learning a lot. I think we have probably 60 experiments or POCs going on right now. If you guys want me to talk about any of those individually, I definitely have some opinions on the stuff that is going well and the stuff that's really challenging. Any questions or anything? I've got some time.
Are you doing anything to integrate your mechanical integrity information in facilities along with your process data for 4.0?
So like rotational, like vibration analysis?
Rotating inspections, anything with process equipment. So on the MES world, we have a lot of data that's great from a process perspective, but when you're looking at preventative maintenance, we also have all this wealth of information, as I've seen in mechanical integrity systems, but they're islands of their own.
Yeah. So here I can give you the General Mills perspective, which is going to be different from different industries. So we've done some POCs around vibration analysis, right, or doing the analytics online, right, and that kind of stuff. And those we've kind of looked at some different vendors, and we have a vendor we would choose. Here's what I would say for us is we don't have systems that when they go down because a motor went out, that we're losing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a day or a minute or whatever, right? So we have some pretty select equipment that we would look at for that type of stuff, and we are doing that. But it's more of a justification issue than, okay, so it would have to be in like bigger motors, like 200 horsepower and those, and we don't have a ton of those. And it would have to be in a situation that said, that's the only line that produces that product or some of those things. And so you kind of really get down to some small use cases. So I guess my answer is yes, we are doing some of that stuff, but it's hard for us to justify it just because of how we're designed. But so where that plays into, I would say is, I keep trying to get our head of operations to kind of say, I want a line that's lights out, right, in 5 years. And I don't think we'll be able to do it because, well, I shouldn't say that. So for us, our ingredients are never the same. So you have wheat, and if it's a rainy year versus a dry year, that changes that ingredient that comes in and is flour and all that kind of stuff. So it gets really hard to kind of manage that in a real-time situation. But I think it would be great for him to sit there and do that. So then you'd have to really understand when that was going to go down, like a month or 2 months ahead of time, so I could really do the right planning. So I don't know if I answered that. Yes.
Hello. Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned something that was kind of interesting. You said you had 60 or so. I'm assuming those like test cases being run at any one time.
Yeah.
Can you give us an idea of what your overall success rate is? How many of those kind of make it actual to full scale implementation in an operating facility versus a test that just didn't work out?
Yeah. So I would say we have 0 that we're in a more piloting, rolling out into a bigger thing, and we're doing a ton of learning on stuff. I would say the one that's probably the furthest is probably like cobots and those types of things, right? So you're using those to kind of replace or augment people and help those out. Our failure rate, I think it's around 50% maybe. in a sense that says we learned enough to make a decision if we're going to move forward or not. And so 50% of the time we're saying we're not going to do anything else on that right now.
Joe, Jaco Wijnands from Air Products here. Just a question, similar question. What is your process for deciding that a POC is going to go into production? And then how do you decide if a POC is not successful, how do you stop it? Because, sometimes people never want to let go.
Yeah. So we're still working on that. And that's the governance part of that triangle, right? So what we're trying to change is the culture that says the center has to basically approve everything for experiments and POCs. We are asking that everybody lets the center know, and the center will then make that decision around, is that going to move forward? So we have a plant in Spain that one of our controls engineer set up time with me, and he's like, I really want to do some machine learning with ThingWorx PTC. And I said, well, what are you trying to solve? And he had a good answer, and he said, here's what I think I can do with this. And I'm like, go ahead, and I will help you in any way. I go, you just need to realize that what you're doing with this POC is learning. You're not saying that we're selecting POC or ThingWorx as our solution. So I think if you really focus on the POC is there to learn what that value is and not focus again on the brands, then you can let people try a lot more things. Because they know that I'm here to help just the company learn on how to do some stuff.
I found your presentation really good because I think some of the things resonate well with challenges I think many of us face probably in this room. But, as I thought about you, kind of like, how do we focus on business problems versus focusing on the name brand or the technology, right? And then I go back to again, I spoke before about using back to basics, like using lean and the tool sets around that mindsets, I go back to like concept of 5 whys. What do you want to get to? You want to get to lights out. Well, what do you need to do to get to that? Well, I need some form of automation. Then what do I need for that? I need some form of data and control, right?
Yep.
And it has to be good data, so I need some form of data governance, and then I need some way of sensing, right? And a lot of people kind of skip over that and go, I need, company XYZ, or a company XYZ says, I've got this square peg for your round hole, and it'll fit in, right?
Yeah.
So, so how are you dealing with that? Like, how do you deal with that outside of saying, hey, we're going to learn? But when, say, the guys that got to go out to the golf course with those CEOs, and they come back to you and say, hey, I was golfing with the CEO of XYZ, you should look at their product. How do you deal with it?
Okay, so in that last scenario, we'd have to say, yeah, we'll take a look at that. So, yeah, so we would take a look at it. So I think what we have done, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, right? Because if we're in this new industrial revolution, there's so many companies out there. Who knows what's going to be the one that sticks or who gets bought out by whatever. So what we're really doing is we're stepping back and saying we have alliance partners that we have relationships with. Rockwell's one, Aviva is one. We have so we're kind of going to them and saying it's yours to lose, and we aren't going to say you're the only guy we're going to look at. But we also know it can't be cats and dogs out there. We are going to have some standards. That's what we're thinking about today, going down with that. I think the challenge for that is sometimes they aren't thinking kind of out there, right? And I'm sure there's lots of reasons for why, and I won't use any brand names. A PLC costs a lot of money, and my phone is probably more powerful and it doesn't cost that much. And I think it's IP60 something now and all those kind of things, right? So there's a challenge that says, part of this industrial revolution is I'm expecting a differential in cost because other people are going to come to market with much more greater things, right? So there's a balance of how do I be innovative and I can do things that I couldn't do before. So I always use a lot of analogies, right? So my analogy on that stuff is I could do home automation before. It just costs a lot of money. I couldn't control my lights for $5, but now I can go and do that. And so on the flip side, to your point around name brands, what I try to tell people is, if whoever, I pick their boss or whatever, right? So I say to some people in our group, I say, if Greg, our VP, came to you and said, I need you to put together a presentation, I have this meeting, you wouldn't turn around and say, well, do you want that in PowerPoint or Google Docs or any of that stuff, right? You'd say, okay, we're going to go do that because we have a standard, we know how to do it. So when I'm expecting people to give us the business, I'm not expecting them to give me here's a tool set, I expect you to go solve it too. That's it's our expertise. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we deal with that when we can. But hopefully our leaders are pretty good about, like, I want lights out. I want no more recalls. This is the direction. You guys are getting paid to do all that other stuff. Go figure that out. I think it's going to be really challenging as this IT-OT convergence happens. And I'm an OT guy, but you sit there and all the cool stuff that IT kind of has with, docking and all these containers, all the stuff they can do. It's like we got to start pushing down to the OT to say, look, there's some really good stuff here. That, if you want to get out of this patching world, just adjust. Sorry. Anything else? All right. Thank you.